All right, so it's 9 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Alex, if you want to share that PowerPoint. And anyone who has joined us, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, since we can't see you quite yet, that would be great. So today we're going to be talking about community-centered engagement, and we'll be kind of using a case study from the Meeteetse Museum's Bison of the Bighorn Basin Project and pulling out elements that you can then implement in your own institutions. And after we finish with our, it's a relatively short presentation, then we can either, I think we can allow you guys to join us here with cameras, so it's more of a discussion format, or we can head over. We have a Zoom link set up. So if you have any preference, let us know in the chat for that as well. I'm Amy Phillips. I'm the Director of Education and Programs at the Meeteetse Museums.
I'm Alex DeSelms. I'm the Director of Collections at the Meeteetse Museum.
So the Bison of the Bighorn Basin Project was kind of started back in September 2020 to coincide with Wyoming's Archaeology Awareness Month, which is also September. Events typically take place in the southern portion of the state, and we're up, for those of you who don't know where our thriving town of Meeteetse is, we're up by Yellowstone. And so it's not always the most accessible. I should say that the Washakie Museum and Cultural Center in Worland does have, sometimes they do an archaeology fair. I think it was canceled this past year because of COVID. But that's, again, across the basin, and some people aren't as likely to do that. And we wanted something that was more interactive than just a fair where you go and, you look at these different booths. And so this idea was floated by Dr. Larry Todd, who's joined us today. And he's a board member for the museum. And we thought it was a great idea. It was a good way to engage the public during a time that I think a lot of us had trouble. And most of our engagement had been virtual. And so this was an in-person, but it was, it's a small percentage of people that own bison crania. And so we were really excited about it. And one of the goals of the project was to kind of reorient the public perspective. Alex will talk about this more in detail, but we see a lot of bison crania throughout the Bighorn Basin used as decor. And they're sources of a lot of information that I could go on and on about, and I will talk about it a little bit, but I'll try not to bore you with the nitty-gritty. And so we wanted to change the perspective from seeing them on the landscape and thinking, oh, that'll look great on, my front gate or my fireplace, whatever, to an acknowledgement and appreciation of the information that can tell us about the Bighorn Basin in the past, bison in the past, and all of that good stuff. So from the very beginning, education was a really large component of this. From a more technical side, we measured bison to look at morphology. You can see the Bighorn Basin outlined here in this this map in yellow. The orangey color is Yellowstone National Park and Grand Teton, and then the blues are National Forest. The greens are National Forest. The blue dots are bison that have come out of paleontological and archaeological sites, and then the red triangles are bison that we measured that have a location. You can see some of them are technically outside of the Bighorn Basin, but they're pretty close. So we measured them anyway. It's worth noting, that a lot of those archaeological and paleontological sites don't actually have bison crania, and the ones that do, like at Horner, are have been, crushed and from the weight of sediments or whatever, and so they're not actually the most accurate, and not really worth measuring. And so the data set is kind of new for the region. And Alex, if you'll hit that next slide. So in total, we measured about 82 bison crania. We have a couple of people that have recently contacted me, and we will measure those. We will also be measuring about 9, I believe, from the Buffalo Bill Museum over in Cody. We had offsite events at Powell, Wyoming, at the Homesteader Museum, and then over in Worland at the Washakie Museum and Cultural Center. And these allowed us to get kind of a more even sample. You can see in this photo, well, so on this slide, in the top right corner is kind of how we measured. People would bring in their bison crania like this gentleman, and we would measure. Alex would enter all of the data in a spreadsheet. We took about 26 measurements, and those were based off of the drawing below that image, which comes from Skinner and Kaysen. It's a 1947 publication, and still very much the guideline for how to do cranial morphology studies. And while we were measuring, as you can see, the gentleman's filling out paperwork. We asked, their name, how to contact them, and then also information about where they found their bison so that we could plot it on a map. Grizzly Archaeology did donate a large it was a pretty large poster size map that we had at measuring events, and people could, write on a sticker the specimen number that we gave their bison and then stick it on the map. And that was a really great talking point. People really enjoyed it. There was a lot of conversation that came from that. I don't know if when he came in, if we had that yet. But so they filled that out, and then any additional information, if there was postcranial bones, anything that they could tell us, really, year and seasonality of when they found their bison, all of that good stuff. And then we also, in January, we were able to email out a couple initial results, and that was largely the sex of their bison, so male, female, the individual's age at death, which, as we'll talk about a little bit on, we're not sure how accurate that was, and we're trying to work on that. And so in this image of the bison over here, you can see the 4 of the 5 measurements that were used to determine the likely sex of the bison. Oh, and then we also emailed out their relative size relative to others in the study. So, Alex, if you'll, there you go. The measurements that we got in the study were then compared with Dr. Chris Widga, who is with the Gray Fossil Site. He's gathered a national data set using, museum specimens, archaeological site specimens, etc., to kind of come up with this. And the gray open circles are his, the ones in his data set, and then the red are the ones from the Bighorn Basin. And as you can see, they kind of tend on that smaller side. And this means they're dating from within the last 3,000 years, and we have some accounts, historical accounts that I'll be looking to add to, that say this is all before about 1892 in the Bighorn Basin. And so this is a relatively fine scale within a very localized area, which means that we can learn more about bison ecology, how bison are responding to climatic shifts, changes with human, hunting with horses and things like that. But also a lot of information that we lost when bison were overhunted at the end of the 19th century. And we'll talk about this a little bit later on and kind of revisit this, but this means that our data set has some implications for wildlife management, bison in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, etc. And so ultimately, we're salvaging some information that otherwise would have been lost. And you'll notice if on that map there was a few bison that were on national forest property, and we didn't, really pick at the legalities of things. We are sharing all of the bison that are found on each national forest with that national forest archaeologist, but we didn't really pick at the there is fining, for taking these things from national forest property, from archaeological sites. Not all of them are from archaeological sites, but I would guess that a percentage are. And it was more important for us to just get the information and kind of join them on this. Bison are a really cool thing, and their crania are cool, and we can teach you, a lot more about your crania can teach you a lot more about bison. And so this kind of feeds in, Alex, if you'll go to that next slide. Education was kind of a major component, and so a large amount of this was done initially during via social media. And here's one of the examples of a social media post, and then in that black and orangish graph, you can see our Facebook engagement during the times, kind of during that peak measuring event, so September through November. And all of those peaks are bison posts. So they were a huge, huge deal. People were very interested. They were, sharing a lot of the information. All of that's organic. We don't have money to pay for for engagement on social media, so it was really great to get and see that much engagement on social media. So Alex, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. So we're going to talk you through how we kind of subconsciously designed this with these characteristics in mind. This was just supposed to be a 1-month project, and then as we kept going, we added more, and then we looked back and noticed that subconsciously this is kind of how we were working with it. So we looked at our strengths and our weaknesses and what resources we have. Larry Todd on our board introduced us to the project. He's an archaeologist who studies bison, and so he thought this would be a cool project for the museum to do. We got together with Ken Cannon, who's kind of started this off with a YouTube presentation as part of our speaker series. Well, actually, it was a Zoom presentation that is now on YouTube, to kind of kick us off on bison in August, and then we started the project in September. So Larry Todd provided the supplies for the project, the calipers, tape measuring tools, and then he had to train us because Amy was semi-familiar with it, but I'm a historian, so I had no no kind of experience with that. So he had to train us and kind of get us up to speed so that we could do this project. And part of the reason we liked it was we don't have a large Native American representation in our collections. There is a small Native American collection in the Belden section of the museum, but that is primarily a collector's or a souvenir collection, and it's primarily Southwest, which is not who would have been found in this part of Wyoming. So it was a way to kind of start edging into talking about kind of the prehistory of the area before the white men came and founded the town. It was also a way to increase public relations. Our local community supports us, but they don't necessarily come into the museum. Our primary visitors are tourists during the summer going to and from Yellowstone. And so we're a small museum. We have many permanent exhibits, but we don't always have a lot of time or funding to do temporary exhibits to switch them out to get people to come back. So we were hoping this would be a way to draw people in. And then also, we don't have a lot of funding. So we couldn't exactly go out and ask for donations of these crania skulls. We don't have the capacity to care for them and to house them. And we weren't sure if the owners would even be interested in donating them. So this is a way that they could bring them in, tell us all about them. They were very excited to do so. And then we took the measurements, we took pictures, and then we sent them home and said, we'll talk to you again soon, hopefully. So that was good. And we're also in the basin. And so we have contacts with people at other institutions in the basin. And so that was helpful. We had to look at our budget, which was basically nothing. It basically covered staff, transportation to and from our offsite locations. And because we were closed, we had the ability to either, we closed in September. September kind of starts our slow season. And so with COVID, we just decided to close. And so we could have appointments that people would come in and follow COVID protocols. And it also made it easy for us to travel because we weren't having to make sure somebody was on staff or on site at our museum to keep it open. And we weren't sure how many people from, say, Powell, which is about an hour north of Meeteetse, or Worland, which is about an hour east-ish, that would come. And so going to them meant we got a better sample of the basin. So back to our budget, we didn't really have much except for staff transportation, but we were lucky that we already had good relationships with the local newspapers, with Wyoming Public Radio. Our Facebook page is really well done, thanks to Amy. And so we were able to get the word out very well. These were where our target audiences who had bison were coming from. And so they read these places or listened to them, and they were able to spread the word to their friends or to bring us names. The newspapers, when they printed it, other news sources picked it up. And so that was all really helpful and didn't really cost anything, which is always nice.
Yeah, so as mentioned, and probably the reason that you're all here, I imagine most of you don't just want to listen to about bison for an hour and a half, but you can't do a crowdsourced project alone. That's just, it's called crowdsourcing for a reason. And it shows the public that you're really interested, and it really is a great way to better relations. If you have, problems connecting with your local community, if you're like us and they just don't have a reason to come into the museum, month after month, because we just don't have the funds to continually change exhibits and things that would bring them in. This approach to events is wonderful. One of the things that with our project, it's kind of archaeological in nature, very much, we're measuring bison crania, and we're not just interested in what is taking place from the time that animal died to when it was found. We're interested in, what happens after it was found too. And that's socially granted importance that you can tell was given to the crania because they're prominently displayed throughout the Bighorn Basin. The owners were very excited about it, and a lot of them had stories that they told us as we were frantically trying to get through like 20 bison and measure up 20 in a couple of hours. And we wish that we would have had another, we had a volunteer, Emily, one of my friends from college, who's an archaeology person, but we needed like another person who would collect kind of the oral histories of these bison. And we do have a potential for, a second go at that. We have gotten some funding, and so in June, we're going to be able to sample some of the bison to get them radiocarbon dated. But that's a small percentage of the overall number. And so we tried during, with a last ditch survey, but a lot of people, as I'm sure most of you know, it's hard to get people to respond to surveys. And when they do, it's very short because people don't think it's important, that their grandfather gave them the bison or their grandfather found the bison and all of these things that we really are actually interested in. And so we wish that that would have been more of a, I guess, effort on our part and more of a built-in component to the project. But that being said, we still got incredible engagement. And a lot of people in the follow-through, getting the results of male or female for their bison, the relative size, etc. All of that has really made people excited, and there's our social media engagement has gone up, even on things that aren't bison related. And we get a lot of, or I get stopped a lot at grocery stores and things, and asked about the Bison project. And so the follow through and continuing to show the public you're interested, whether that's a social media update, whether that's, seeking for funding if it's needed, or just, be available to talk about it. It opens access to information that you otherwise wouldn't get. A lot of these are in private collections. The reason that we felt like this was a good project for our area was not only that they're displayed everywhere, but that we have a lot of ranches, and the ranches have, a lot of property. And so it's a way to, I don't know how to say it that's not kind of weird, but to find out what's on their property, to get the history of this area with cooperation and with a mutual interest. And then there's, of course, the education potential, which is, fulfills our mission statement, makes everybody happy. So, Alex, I'll let you talk about what to crowdsource.
So Amy will talk a little bit more about particularly why we picked bison to kind of continue expanding this project with. But some ideas are, what is your community interested in? So you might look at decor items. As you can see, these are two pictures, one historic on the right, one from the 1990s, of the Pallet Ranch, which was owned by A. Anderson, the first Forest Service superintendent up here. And you see a number of bison skulls decorating his house. And another of our board members, we measured one of her skulls, and she said that it had been on this cabin on their property for over 50 years. So obviously it's something that's important to people. They're going to keep it around. They like to display it. They like to talk about it. But because we're part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, tourists come here to see bison in Yellowstone, or if they stop at Thermopolis in the Hot Springs State Park. And so nearby, Cody has bison sculptures as public art that are around at different businesses that local artists, well, I think they're local, I don't actually know the artists, but they've decorated the bison. So they're very colorful. People see them when they're around Cody. So those are some ideas about, you can look at public art, you can look at decor items, popular entertainment in the area, what social media posts have been popular, or what requests do you get from visitors that isn't seen in your museum currently. Like we kind of said, Yellowstone and popular tourist attractions. Is there something not connected with your institution that you might want to connect to? if you don't want to do something with physical objects, you might figure out more ways to do oral history projects. Or if you have an event you want to commemorate, maybe you don't necessarily have room or need to store photographs, but maybe people would be interested in a scanning day where you could get scans of the photographs and information about who, when, where, and then the owner could still take them home and keep them as part of their collection. Also, America 250 is coming up, so maybe there's something coming up that you think would be important to have a project about.
Yeah,
I'll let Amy go into, yeah.
Yeah, so bison also have, they're the national mammal. So there's kind of this national attention on them. They're very charismatic. I mean, who doesn't love an animal with pantaloons? But they also have a very long and very complex history. Native Americans have had relationships with bison. They look at them as kin in some cases, and that's been going on for over 10,000 years. There's also the more recent and kind of darker side of that history where they were overhunted to the brink of extinction at the end of the 19th century. And that caused a bottlenecking in the population and also impacts our understanding of bison, behavior and ecology and things like that, migration habits, etc. We don't actually know that much about how bison functioned in, before these managed herds that we have today. We are continuously learning more, but that's something that is an area where this project can start to contribute to. So there's, that gap in knowledge, but it also, then allows us to bring in that long-lasting history and tell that story. And it's a good entry point for non-Native Americans to begin to think about and understand colonialism, but also what it means to be Native in the past as well as today. We have a podcast out that focuses on this project, and Jason Valdez, who's Eastern Shoshone, we'll talk about a little bit more about him in a few minutes, but he mentioned that a lot of people don't actually think of Native Americans as being, alive today. They think of it as very much like the Old West and cowboys versus Indians and stuff like that. And our museum at the moment doesn't do much to dissuade that. And this project specifically is going to allow us to open that conversation, and we'll have actual voices and things like that to really talk about who Native Americans are today, what it means to be Native, and tribal sovereignty, all of that kind of stuff. This very neutral, the bison allows us to open that conversation. And it's also, the high visibility of it is kind of free advertising. We're doing this work, and then we tell the owners of the bison crania, and they have people over for dinner or what have you, and they get to, tell their guests about the bison crania. This was a male bison, and they think it was about 12 years old, or, whatever the case may be. And that works towards our, ultimate goal of that public reorientation of the viewpoint, from something that's just there for the taking to something that can actually tell them about, where they live and their surroundings. And so all of that kind of stuff goes into this project. And we didn't necessarily know that when we started. We knew that people were interested. We knew they were everywhere. We know that we got a very small percentage of what's out there. And that's about it. But, you know, over time, we kind of discovered this, and it was a reason to, you know, continue with that follow through and continue to look into things, and then do our best to get that out to the public, which we'll talk about in a few minutes.
So one of the best things about this project was the other institutions and project partners we ended up doing. We've mentioned Larry Todd and his Grizzly company that did the maps and also the tools and the training. We also have the Bighorn National Recreation Area that provided us with specimens. We couldn't find a logo specific to the National Recreation Area. We just saw the National Park Service, so we ended up leaving that off, but they were very excited to participate in the project. The Park County Archives didn't actually have any specimens, but they provided narratives and historical context, especially for the podcast and other historical research on the bison. We've talked about our events at the Washakie Museum and the Homesteader Museum. And these were beneficial to us both. It wasn't just beneficial for us. When we were at these events, they got numbers through their doors that they were able to provide. The Washakie also had a couple of bison skulls that we measured for them, and so we were able to provide them with information. And both of these locations expressed interest in maybe we could come back and present on our findings. So again, that's getting numbers in for them, that's getting numbers in for us. We also measured skulls at Old Trail Town in Cody. They had just so many skulls. I think we got a fraction of them just because they were just lined up. They were in various conditions. Some of them weren't that complete, so we decided to skip them. We were also kind of afraid to move some of them in case they just totally fell apart. Some of them were up on, yeah, that too. Some of them were up on mantles above fireplaces that there were so many skulls in front of them that we didn't know how we'd get a ladder up there to look at. But Old Trail Town was very happy to help, happy to be part of this, very interested in it. And then we've just received funding from the Friesen Institute that we will be able to radiocarbon date and isotope analyze a few of the specimens. And we also received funding from the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. Amy got a fellowship there that she'll be able to do more testing, and she'll also be able to measure the collections in the Draper Museum and anywhere else in the center. And again, it's another place for us to present. And because the Buffalo Bill has a large connection with memberships, with visitors, tourists, that should get us able to get the word out a lot better and give us numbers, give the Buffalo Bill numbers. I don't know quite how they keep track of that, but we keep track of numbers at our presentations to show our board that yes, we are being active in the community. People are coming in, they're interested in it. At the bottom, we have listed the members of our scientific advisory committee. They all appeared on the podcast with Amy. They've got some really good information, insights. They were just very helpful overall with this project. And we do not have on here the Antlers Ranch and Sam May, the owner. This ranch is outside of Meeteetse, and they actually have bison that they farm or ranch. And they are providing us with skulls of known bison ages so that we can further test and refine some of those bison ages that we got back in our test results that were inconclusive or not enough data, and that'll help us kind of focus that.
And so, Alex, I'm going to add, Hot Springs State Park got back to me actually just yesterday, and they have bison of known ages that we'll also be able to measure. So there's awesome. All sorts of people that we forgot to put on the PowerPoint.
Yeah, They just keep popping up, like you said, just yesterday, when we thought we were done with this, with getting this presentation ready. So, but especially with the Park County Archives and the Homesteader Museum, since they are in Park County with us and they're locally focused, we're continuing our partnerships with them. We started a Connecting Community survey. We tried this on our own, as many of you may have done, to get information about our community during COVID. And I think we had 2 or 3, maybe 5 responses. And so we asked the archives and the homesteader, we're looking for this. You might be looking for this. How will we turn this into a competition in the hopes that we will actually get people to do this? And it worked. We went from about 5 to, I believe, almost 30. And we had a prize, a drawing. So that was very beneficial. And we're hoping to continue that with them annually. So we're not sure what the topic is for next year. But it was a great opportunity to continue to work with our partners in this area.
So in terms of a timeline, think about this before you start the project, but also, in our case, we thought it was going to be a month-long thing, and as you can see, that is very much not the case. So we began actually in August. We had, throughout the summer, a human and wildlife interactions speaker series, and so I invited a ton of people, professors, researchers, all sorts of people, to talk about, different human and wildlife interactions in the hopes that, how these things are dealt with throughout the world would also benefit ranchers in our area who deal with like grizzly bears and wolves, and their interactions all the time. And it would also be of interest to tourists, but then we had COVID, and so we turned it into a webinar, which actually allowed us to add more speakers. But one of the speakers who was on the docket from the very beginning was Dr. Ken Cannon, who is now the co-principal investigator on the project. And he, as Alex mentioned, did a Zoom presentation for us on bison in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And that was then turned, I then put it on YouTube afterwards. And he set up the project pretty nicely, kind of contextualizing it a little bit. And then we opened up in September our event. And as Alex also mentioned, we were closed during September, so everything was by appointment. We got a lot of press coverage in the last week, and so we decided to continue that through November. And then in December, we kind of compiled some data, looked at male versus female in the data set, projected age at death, and all sorts of things, the morphology as compared to national morphology. And then all of those results were sent out to participants in the last week of January. And during January, I also met with all of those bison experts, now turned science advisors. And we created a podcast that is now the 2nd season of the museum's podcast, Matizi Stories. And the goal of that was really to, go that extra step and contextualize things even farther, so that it makes sense to people why we're doing this, and what benefits there are to doing this. And so that went out in February. We've had over 700 people listen to it since then, which is pretty good considering our town population is about 330. So that's, double the town. And then in March and April, we were grant writing, and that turned out really well. As Alex also mentioned, got the Friesen Institute grant, which will allow us to radiocarbon date. We'll sample in June and then get those results by August. And then I received a fellowship at the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. We're also planning on, the Antlers Ranch has been amazing and is going to donate a an actual bison so that we can do some experimental archaeology and butcher that using stone tools and things, and also have, potentially a live roundtable discussion, which was the last episode of the podcast. And then all of this is kind of building towards a virtual exhibit that will talk about bison, give out the results of this experiment, or not this experiment, of this project, and be a way, that we can talk about the near extinction, we can talk about the difficult history, but we can also talk about all of the fun stuff too, and people can engage with it on their own terms. The fellowship at the Buffalo Bill is also going to allow me to collaborate with their educational staff and create a lesson plan or materials based off of the project for schools throughout the area. That was important, for us as a museum to really, our education side of things and interactions with schools are limited. And so that's important there, but also it was important. Jason Valdez mentioned that it was one of the things that he was most, one of his goals for this was that the young people know about it. And so we'll be able to do that. But I also started a teaching advisory committee that we're looking for applications now. And so that'll allow us to ask teachers, what are the barriers for you to take part in something or use lesson plans from a museum, use museum resources? What are you most looking for? How can we work together to make this something that's good for both of us? And so, this project hopefully will be done by December. That's kind of the goal, but it might not be. So, oh, and really quick, I wanted to add all of these different outcomes from this. Talking about the bottlenecking of bison, using these more scientific connections, and also the reintroduction of bison to tribal lands, which is taking place. There's a lot of legislation that's gone through recently about this. It really shows relevance of museums in a time where we're facing cutbacks. We're going to continue to face cutbacks, and it's, we have to be more competitive for funding. Projects like this one, where you have that really strong community engagement, but you also have these other avenues of outcomes and things like that, really does make a good case for why your museum is relevant and why it continues to be relevant.
So as we've said several times, this was just supposed to be a month, and then it kept stretching out. And so we suggest you find ways to avoid one and done projects, whether that to be to do different things or to expand the project, because our project is tied with Archaeology Awareness Month. We can do similar projects in the future if and when we ever finish with the bison. These could be projectile points or bighorn sheep, or there are so many things. I mentioned earlier America 250, upcoming celebrations, definitely think about that. But two, this was to find a new audience, or at least to bring back an audience, to build relationships with them, to find partners. And all of this means you can't just drop the ball when you're done with the project. That's why we started partly why we started the Connecting Communities survey with our partners of other local institutions in Park County, as a way to keep us involved with each other and to help each other out. And so feel free to expand your project to incorporate a wider audience, to design and revise it. It was supposed to be a month, and we're still going. At least 6 months later, and it'll probably be it'll take at least a year. So, figure out what audience you're missing, what they pay attention to, how interested they are. As Amy said, we have a lot of people interested in this, so we've decided to keep going with it and figure out new ways to engage them and to talk about this. And then multiple mediums to make sure that you're getting the information out there. So yeah, we're doing the social media posts, and the podcast helps us get it out there. Both of these are not just for tourists or for locals. They're for everybody who wants to find out about them. And so it keeps people engaged with our museum, with our social media. We've talked about lesson plans, and then also the virtual exhibit that we're planning so that we can have something on our website about all the research that Amy has done, that this project has provided, especially during COVID when our funding went down, but our funding has been going down anyway. Virtual exhibits are great because they're low cost. They also allow us to reach people who may not be able to actually come to the museum, and people can take them at their own pace. The Bison is a starting point to talk about difficult subjects, and so people can view what they want and then come back and view the rest of the exhibit later. And it saves us room in our gallery that we spaces at a premium for other exhibits. So we may be able to put something in, but we're not sure. And so we're definitely going to do the virtual exhibit to make sure that people can really delve into the research that we've conducted and that we've seen.
So we're going to go ahead and open it up to a Q&A. We were going to do this kind of discussion format. So I don't know, I'm not sure because this looks different than, when we're presenting, it looks different, the screen. So I think you guys can request and we can add you to see. No?
I think so. I'm going to try.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that we should be able to add you and open this up to, what partnerships can your institution form, all of that stuff. If this doesn't work here, we have a Zoom link that I'll just throw in the chat and you can join us over on Zoom. So if you have a preference, also throw that in the chat.
And if you want to just have this discussion in chat, that's fine with us too. We just, sometimes discussions are easier and you can actually see people and talk to them.
Yeah. Yeah, if any questions, any comments, all sorts of things. If you would be interested in doing the Bison Project in your area, Robert, I know you were here, and you're in Gillette, and Gillette has a big old bison ranch to use for bison of known ages, and you're kind of in a similar land area as us, and you could definitely do a bison project. Do you want me to take that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you can take that, Amy.
Okay. Todd, we are going to be doing an online exhibit. We'll be using Genially, and that way it's going to loosely follow kind of the format of our podcast. So it'll kind of start with, bison first coming to North America. That'll be pretty brief, and then we'll talk about, it'll have a focus on whenever, we get the dates back for where our bison came from, or like time-wise, but then also talk about, the near extinction of bison, the conservation effort, which, this area specifically, the Bighorn Basin, is very much tied to. And we'll also talk about tribal reintroduction of bison to tribal lands, and the legislation there, and what that means for natives, specifically the Eastern Shoshone. And so it'll talk about a lot of things, and then the lesson plans will kind of be built off of that. So that's kind of the goal now. In terms of consultations, Jason Valdez is Eastern Shoshone. He's the person kind of driving the Eastern Shoshone's bison herd. He's working also to get a quarantine facility for bison from Yellowstone. So brucellosis is kind of a hot topic around here. Brucellosis is a disease that is carried by bison. It was brought over by cattle, and it can result in all sorts of things, but stillbirths, and more. And the bison carry it, and it's difficult to vaccinate them from that. And so a lot of bison tend to, there tends to be some prejudice between ranchers and conservation workers in terms of that brucellosis, but also I'm sure it was in the news that Yellowstone culled, I can't remember how, was it like, it was a substantial amount of bison this past year, and a way to, kind of decrease that number is to figure out where those bison can go. But they have to be certified brucellosis free. And so that's where a quarantine facility comes into play. And right now, somewhere in Montana, I'm forgetting the name, has a quarantine facility there, but Jason is looking to start one, and has gotten approval to start one on the Wind River Reservation here in Wyoming, and that will hopefully decrease the amount of cold bison, which is important because of a bunch of genetic things. So did you want me to get that one too from David?
I was going to ask. You would probably know more, but I can try.
So we've emailed the bison crania, the people who brought in bison crania, the results back in January. And then when we got funding, I recently emailed and asked if, we have to narrow down, because we have funding for about 15 bison to get radiocarbon dated and tested for stable isotope analysis. And so that's not very many. We measured 82. And so we emailed them again with the announcement that we have funding. And then also if they really want to get their bison radiocarbon dated and tested for that further analysis, the only way to do that is to donate the $330 that it takes for each bison crania. And so we have had a couple people take us up on that. And that's just going to allow us to, test more, which will ultimately better give, us a deeper understanding and a better understanding on what bison were doing here, when they were living. We can look at, bison through time, all sorts of fun stuff with that new information that we'll be getting.
And if I recall correctly, to narrow it down to the 15, you're choosing more complete skulls and or skulls that have better finite location data.
Yeah, those are kind of the two variables we're using. So, though they all have relatively decent location data, there was, I think, one that was bought from an auction, and that one has no location data. And there's a couple that it's a little fuzzy on the location data. All of the ones from Trail Town, because there are so many, they don't really have great provenience for any of them, and so we're not gonna radiocarbon date probably any of those. Have no idea where they came from within the Bighorn Basin, and the location data allows us to look at other information as well. So, does anybody have any ideas for crowdsourced in their institutions, whether that be for oral histories or Alex mentioned like teacups or other
teacup, right?
We could have done like sheep shears, or we have a lot of those.
We have a lot of things that we could have, yeah.
You could also choose, what you want to crowdsource based off of the partnerships that you really want to enhance and form. So whether that's, with a local geology museum and you want to look at some rocks, or if it's, a botany organization or department at the university. Larry Todd and I attended a conference back in December that was about, citizen science. And this is kind of citizen science. I mean, it is, but there's also, the opportunity for like iNaturalist projects and bird watching, stuff like that you can also do depending on the focus of your museum. Are there any other questions? Nobody wants to share their screen? Talk to us?
I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so we're forming a advisory committee, kind of like Alex's collections committee, that talks about what we do and don't take. This will give us a better idea of what teachers in Wyoming need from museums, so that we're not just doing something that we really want to do, that it actually benefits them. And so we will, in our initial meeting, ask them, how do you teach about bison so far, or do you? Native Americans, that sort of thing. And then going from those answers, how can we, we have this project that we've done, we have resources. We have funding to do like a 3D printed bison crania, and potentially some other like hands-on education resources that we can distribute to schools when they want to teach this. And so how can you use these resources if we, create them? Would you, do you want to visit the museum, and do you just have problems getting funding for that? All sorts of things. It's basically how we can be a better resource for them. And, you know, they've faced all sorts of things in the last year, from, you know, teaching on Zoom to having regulations. There's always the standardized testing. And so we want to make sure that we're doing our best to fulfill what they need. And we have the resources to do that. And so the teaching advisory committee will kind of be the final approval, but they'll also help us along the way to make sure we're going in the right direction with the lesson plan and with the resources that we're making for schools. So on this project, and also, you know, others.
I figured since we had so much information on this one, it was a good place to start. And then we could, based on what we hear they need, we can branch out to other things.
Yeah, it was a good excuse to start. I've been thinking about this for a while, and it was a good excuse to start this. And, you know, school's wrapping up, so we gave them a month to kind of respond to us. But we have had a lot of, that's another post that got a lot of social media attention. And so we're hoping that that bodes well for the committee. And we didn't limit it just to Meeteetse teachers because there's not very many, and we wanted it to be applicable to all sorts of schools through Wyoming. You know, the beauty of Zoom and resources like this, I feel like we can reach more. We also have, you know, the endangered black-footed ferret here at the museum, and Meeteetse is kind of central to that. And so this is, you know, that's another thing that we can start to work on lesson plans for. Even just the education outcomes of exhibits and things like that. By having an advisory committee, we can run ideas past them and get some really good feedback.
Any other questions, comments? Anybody want to try joining and actually talking to us? We've got plenty of time left, so.
We can also head over to Zoom. We have the link ready, so. Yeah, let me grab. So we had specimen release forms that everybody filled out that I will find momentarily. And, you know, a lot of them, some of them were concerned about the locations and all of that. But that was, I thought that was going to be a bigger deal than it actually was. People really didn't mind. So in terms of the form, and Alex, I don't know if you have that on your computer. I'm on my personal computer.
I'm gonna try.
Okay, since my work computer doesn't have anything. And so on their form, you know, we had their name, email, phone number. How did you find the crania? So was it, you know, the exposure of the horns? Was it eroding out of a cut bank, or, you know, road or river? Other, you know, ways of finding. Where was it located? And then where there are other bones around the crania. The bones thing, if there were postcranial bones or, you know, other artifacts, that was shared with the Forest Service people. And actually, we're going to have to continue to share because it just hasn't stopped. And so we'll be updating that. And then the year of collection and the season, if it was known. And then we had them, the little agreement thing says, I understand that Meeteetse Museums is using the information and photographs of bison crania provided to better understand the size of bison in the Bighorn Basin. I give the Metis museums the right to publish and store the information gathered through the study. We didn't, so our data sheet doesn't have the names of the people who brought in the bison. And a lot of these were found, in the early 1900s, or, even not earlier, but, they're kind of like family heirlooms in a way. And so some of this, the location of the bison was relatively general, but still pretty narrowed. And then the in terms, like, when it's when they came off Forest Service property or BLM, things like that. When we do create the virtual exhibit, we will address that, and we will address that that's illegal, and you can get into trouble for that. But it was important for us to get this information, that we didn't just start pointing fingers and start preaching, kind of. It was very much like join them on their enthusiasm. And we didn't, there was in the Bighorns, when I shared the information with their archaeologist, he did note that there were an awful lot of bison coming out from this one location, and he's gonna, check that out in the coming months. We have the photographs, we have the measurements that we can share with him, just not the name of the person. So yeah, and then a lot of these, if we open this up to like projectile points and things like that, kind of the thought behind it is that a lot of this is on private ranches, and so not so much the Forest Service and stuff like that, though we will encounter that because we're surrounded by Forest Service and public lands. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question. Awesome. The maps also helped, I think, because people, I think people were so excited about, how their bison related to the other bison in terms of like the landscape, that and I thought a lot of people would be like, I don't feel comfortable putting the location of my bison on the map, but we never ran up against that. So, and it's, it is a map of the entire basin, which is a lot of land. So it's not very fine scale, but it did, serve its purpose.
Before we got that, those large maps to take to our offsite events, we had printed off a little map of the basin, just so when people came in and were measuring and they're like, I kind of remembered, we could pull out at least the piece of paper and they'd be like, oh, I think it's over here, and they could write that down. But yeah, I think the big maps went over better.
Yeah, we also had extra computers in case the main computer died, but also to talk about or like pull up like Google Maps or something and see if they could really locate it on there. But yeah, Larry Todd, I agree. And we're definitely going to include that in the lesson plans, ARPA, but also it will be a strong component in the virtual exhibit. We just have to, we're going to find a way that people don't feel attacked or targeted or anything, because no one wants that. And so a tactful way. The other component that in the future we're gonna kind of crowdsource is, and one of our board members kind of started this. She brought in a photograph of a toddler with like a bison crania behind it that's bigger than the toddler, and so we're gonna ask for images like that, look through our collection and see if we have some things like that, and include those in the exhibit, because people around here, they're more likely to pay attention and be involved if it's so and so's family member and stuff like that, and so we're going to include those images, and I don't know if anybody that brought in a bison crania has like a historic image of that specific one. We did find that same board member, she brought in one from a cabin, and I found a picture of the cabin with the bison crania, and so we'll be able to include some of those and have that local connection, so people feel like it's really relevant to them. In terms of final data, where we'll make this available outside of our virtual exhibit, we would the data sheet itself to ResearchGate. None of the locations, in terms, a lot of times archaeologists have problems sharing data because of the site location, but the information that we have in terms of location is so broad. It's narrow enough for us to do stuff with, but it's not like this is site 48 PA, whatever the number is, and so it's going to allow us to share that information, some data, and so we will upload that to ResearchGate so that anyone can use it, and I've also said, but we'll share it with the National Forest archaeologists. We'll also, when we have the radiocarbon dates, those will go to Robert Kelly's database of radiocarbon dates at the University of Wyoming. So all of the information that we're collecting is going to be available for other researchers and scholars. Any more questions? Yeah. Well, in Colorado also, I'm not sure how a bison project would go there, just because of some of the urban areas are very, have seen a lot of development. But a bison project in, where museums in the area ask for bison to be brought in, all the a bison project really entails is the 26 measurements, and those are based on like a complete bison. So if they're not as complete, it takes you less time to measure them. But all of that information to the data set, and expand our. So if anyone is interested in that, you can email me. I don't know if Alex that slide again with our email addresses, but yeah, anyone, as long as there were bison in your area, which is most do have bison or did. For example, the Ken Cannon is going to do one in Logan, Utah. And so and then when we start to like add more, we can, you know, how bison are different in one area. You know, the Bighorn Basin is very closed versus areas. We can look at things like migration. There's all sorts of fun stuff we can do. Thanks, Karen. Any other questions or concerns or ideas for crowdsourced projects in your own? Yes, I put it very succinctly. That's what I'm trying to say. Thanks for coming, Todd, and for your
Thanks. Yeah, we were lucky that the public was so interested in this.
Mm-hmm. And again, just, you know, it was a large amount of subject matter. If you see things around the area where you live that are, you know, over and over again, it's a good bet that the public values that, and you can build something off of it. And even better, it kind of necessarily aligns statement at your institution. All right, if there aren't any last minute questions, we might just shut this down. Yeah, so any last minute questions, throw them in the chat. Any ideas, those work too. Feel free to contact either of us. We're always open to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, and I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Feel free to follow along on the Bison Project. Our Facebook is kind of probably the best way. We also put up blog updates on our website, which was recently redone, and it's quite good looking in my opinion.